For decades, Germany trusted New York with its gold. Then one day, it asked for it back subscribe, because what happened next shook the foundations of global trust. Money works only as long as trust does. Not the kind you talk about in speeches, but the silent, unspoken trust that your wealth exists where you're told it does. When Germany quietly questioned that trust in 2013, it wasn't just about gold bars in a vault. It was about whether the post-war financial order itself was starting to crack. After World War II, Germany was broken in every sense of the word. Its cities were rubble, its currency worthless, its sovereignty fractured. Gold, once the ultimate symbol of power, had become a liability, something better kept far away from a defeated nation still finding its footing. So Germany did what many countries did in the Cold War era. It sent its gold abroad: New York, London, Paris, places that felt safe, stable, unquestionable. New York, in particular, became the chosen sanctuary. The Federal Reserve's vaults beneath Manhattan were portrayed as impregnable steel, concrete, secrecy layered upon secrecy. The dollar was king. The United States was the guarantor of the global system, and gold sitting under the Fed's floors was a symbol of alliance, not risk. Trust wasn't debated, it was assumed. Decades passed. The Cold War ended. Germany reunified. Its economy surged back to life, becoming the industrial engine of Europe. Yet the gold stayed put, quiet, untouched, almost forgotten, until it wasn't. By the early 2000s, something subtle began to change. Central banks stopped talking about gold as a barbarous relic. Instead, they stopped talking about it at all. Silence replaced confidence. Balance sheets grew bloated, currencies multiplied, and financial engineering replaced restraint. After the 2008 crisis, real trust, never fully returned. Germany noticed. Inside the Bundesbank, questions that were once unthinkable started being asked in hushed tones. How often is our gold audited? Do we physically inspect it? If there were a crisis, real crisis, how fast could we access it? Not theoretically, physically. The answers were unsatisfying. Audits were indirect. Inspections were limited. Access was procedural, slow, diplomatic. Gold, it turned out, was less like cash in a safe and more like a promise written in someone else's handwriting. In 2013, Germany did something that sounded boring on paper, but explosive in meaning. It asked for its gold back. Not all of it, just a portion, quietly, politely. No accusations, no headlines, just logistics. And that's when the unease began. The gold did not come back quickly, or easily, or transparently. Shipments were delayed, schedules stretched, explanations grew technical, then vague. At one point, Germany was told that returning the gold would take 7 years. 7 years to move metal that supposedly sat neatly stacked in a vault. Rumors filled the vacuum. Some whispered that the bars had been leased. Others claimed they had been swapped, rehypothecated, or melted down and recast. The phrase "phantom bars" began circulating not because anyone could prove wrongdoing, but because no one could prove certainty. Trust doesn't collapse when you discover a lie. It collapses when you can't get a straight answer. When the first bars finally arrived in Frankfurt, another detail fueled suspicion. Some of the gold had been melted down and recast before return. Officially, this was for quality assurance. Unofficially, it raised a darker question. If the bars were unchanged and untouched, why melt them at all? Germany didn't scream. It didn't accuse. It simply continued to repatriate. Behind the scenes, the message was clear. Trust is no longer assumed, it must be verified. What most people missed was this: Germany wasn't acting alone. As Berlin quietly brought gold home, other central banks were watching. The Netherlands followed. Austria hesitated, then moved. Eastern European nations began buying gold outright instead of storing it abroad. Even countries publicly aligned with the dollar system started adjusting their reserve strategies. This wasn't about fear of theft. It was about fear of dependency. Gold held abroad is gold you don't fully control. And in a crisis, control matters more than yield, efficiency, or diplomacy. The real shock wasn't Germany's request. It was that no one laughed it off. The repatriation wave exposed an uncomfortable truth. The global financial system runs on layered trust, and much of that trust is historical, not structural. The dollar's dominance depends not just on markets, but on belief. Belief that obligations will be honored, that assets are where they're supposed to be, that alliances won't fracture under stress. Gold doesn't rely on belief, it just exists. As tensions rose between major powers, trade wars, sanctions, frozen reserves, gold quietly reasserted itself as the asset of last resort, not because it pays interest, but because it answers to no one. For countries outside the Western Bloc, Germany's move was a signal. If Europe's most disciplined economy wanted its gold close, why shouldn't they? If trust between allies required physical verification, what did that say about the system as a whole? Central banks began buying gold at the fastest pace in decades, not trading it, not leasing it, hoarding it. The message wasn't anti-American. It was post-trust. Germany's gold didn't just come home, it changed the conversation. In a world of digital money, instantaneous transfers, and balance sheets measured in trillions, gold's appeal isn't nostalgia, it's finality. No counterparty risk, no sanctions, no server outage, no political override. Repatriation isn't about panic. It's about optionality, about ensuring that when the system bends, as history says it always does, you're not negotiating access to your own wealth. The real crisis isn't whether the gold was ever missing. It's that the question had to be asked at all. Trust, once questioned, never fully resets. It recalibrates, and the quiet movement of gold across borders tells a story far bigger than bars and vaults. It tells us that the era of blind faith in financial guardians is ending and being replaced by something older, heavier, and far less forgiving. In the decades after the war, Germany rebuilt itself into an export machine. Cars, chemicals, precision tools, everything stamped "Made in Germany" carried quiet discipline and restraint. But beneath that efficiency sat a deep historical scar. Germans remembered what it felt like when money dissolved, when paper promises turned to ash, when trust vanished overnight. That memory never left the Bundesbank. It shaped how Germany viewed gold not as a relic, not as a barbarous metal, but as a last line of truth. That's why, quietly, almost politely, Germany asked a simple question in the early 2000s. A question that made people uncomfortable. Can we see our gold? Not a demand, not an accusation, just a request. Because for decades, most of Germany's reserves weren't in Frankfurt. They were abroad: New York, London, Paris. This arrangement was born out of Cold War logic. If Soviet tanks rolled west, Germany's gold would already be safe, beyond reach, inside the vaults of allies. It was a strategic bet on permanence, on trust, on the idea that alliances don't fracture. But history has a way of testing assumptions. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, something subtle had changed. The dollar was still dominant, but it was being stretched. U.S. deficits grew larger. Financial engineering grew more complex. Gold leasing, swaps, and rehypothecation became normal language inside bullion banks. Gold wasn't just stored anymore. It was used, lent out, traded, promised multiple times over. On paper, everything balanced. On paper, it always does. Inside Germany, a new generation of politicians, auditors, and citizens began asking uncomfortable questions. Not conspiracy theory questions, accounting questions. Where exactly are the bars? What serial numbers? What purity? How often are they audited? When was the last physical inspection? The answers were vague. Reports referenced trust in partners. Audits were described as procedural. Inspections were not customary. The gold existed, everyone said. Why ask? But Germany knew something most countries had forgotten. In a real crisis, trust is the first casualty. Then came 2008. When Lehman collapsed, the global financial system froze. Interbank trust evaporated in days. Overnight lending stopped. Even the strongest institutions refused to believe each other's balance sheets. Central banks had to step in as lenders of last resort, not just for banks, but for trust itself. That moment changed everything. If banks didn't trust banks, why should nations blindly trust vaults they'd never seen? Inside Germany's parliament, pressure built. Citizens demanded transparency. The Bundesbank faced scrutiny it hadn't seen in decades. And finally, in 2013, the request became official. Germany would repatriate its gold. Not all of it, not dramatically, just a portion. 300 tons from New York, another chunk from Paris. Slowly, calmly, over several years. On the surface, it sounded administrative. Underneath, it was seismic. Because gold doesn't move quietly. Moving gold means acknowledging it's there, in specific bars, with specific weights, in a specific place. It means unsealing vaults, verifying serial numbers, matching records. It means confronting a question no one wants to answer out loud. Is the gold still intact? Almost immediately, the tone shifted. The process would take years, officials said. Logistics, security, refining capacity, transportation limits. Everything sounded reasonable. And yet, whispers began circulating in financial circles. Why would it take 7 years to move metal that supposedly sat untouched? Why would bars need to be melted and recast before return? Why couldn't Germany simply receive its original bars back? That's when the phrase started appearing in blogs, forums, and eventually mainstream financial commentary. Phantom bars. The idea was simple and terrifying. If gold had been leased out, swapped, or pledged multiple times, then what sat in the vaults might not be the original bars Germany deposited. Or worse, not enough bars at all. Gold might exist on balance sheets, but not in physical reality. No proof was ever publicly shown, but silence can speak louder than evidence. Germany didn't accuse, it didn't threaten, it just waited and waited. When the first shipments finally arrived in Frankfurt, something odd happened. Instead of public celebration, there was restraint, minimal press access, controlled statements. The Bundesbank confirmed delivery, but avoided details. No grand unveiling of bars, no serial number lists, just confirmation that gold had returned, reassurance without transparency. Inside financial institutions, the message was received clearly. If Germany, a model ally, disciplined, patient, non-confrontational, felt the need to bring its gold home, what did that say about the system? Suddenly, Germany wasn't alone. The Netherlands followed. Austria asked questions. Hungary repatriated aggressively. Poland announced major purchases. Even countries with strained relationships with the U.S., Russia, China accelerated domestic storage and accumulation. Central banks, once net sellers of gold, became net buyers again, quietly, consistently, relentlessly. Gold, the asset everyone said no longer mattered, was being hoarded by the institutions with the clearest view of the system's plumbing. This wasn't nostalgia, it was insurance. Because gold doesn't default. It doesn't require trust in another party's promise. It doesn't depend on a payment system staying online. In moments of geopolitical fracture, gold answers to no sanction, no freeze, no software update. And the more digital money became, the more valuable that independence felt. The repatriation wasn't just about metal. It was about sovereignty, about control, about reducing counterparty risk in a world where alliances are conditional and crises arrive faster than treaties can be written. Germany never said it didn't trust the United States. It simply acted like trust has a limit. And that distinction matters, because when central banks act, they rarely explain why in emotional terms. They speak in technocratic language. but their behavior tells the real story. And the story was this: the system that once felt unbreakable was now being quietly hedged against by the very people who built it. This wasn't a run by the public. It was a run by governments. And history shows, when nations start moving their gold, they're preparing for a world where words carry less weight than metal. The question was no longer whether the dollar system would change. It was how fast and who would be left trusting paper when the music stopped. The story really begins long before 2013. It starts in the ruins of post-war Europe, when Germany's cities were still smoking and its currency had already died once in living memory. Germans did not forget what worthless money feels like. They lived it. They bartered furniture for bread. They watched life savings evaporate into ash. And when the new German state was rebuilt, its leaders made a quiet decision that shaped everything that followed. Trust in money would never be taken lightly again. So when Germany began accumulating gold reserves during the Cold War, the logic of storage was simple and brutally strategic. The world was split into blocks. Tanks faced each other across Europe. If the Soviet Union ever rolled west, German gold sitting in Frankfurt could be seized in days. But gold stored in New York? That gold would be safe, liquid, and instantly usable inside the dollar system that governed global trade. It wasn't about yield. Gold paid no interest. It was about survival. The Bundesbank didn't just trust the United States. It depended on it. New York became the world's gold vault not because of secrecy, but because of credibility. Deep underground, beneath Manhattan streets, sat thousands of tons of metal belonging to dozens of nations, stacked like silent witnesses to a monetary order built on faith. Gold was no longer moving. It was sleeping. And for decades, no one questioned it. Then the world changed. The Cold War ended. Germany reunified. The dollar system expanded. Finance accelerated. Gold faded from public conversation, replaced by derivatives, leverage, and digits on screens. Central banks talked about inflation targets and bond yields, not bars and vaults. Gold became symbolic, almost decorative. Something you mentioned, not something you demanded to see. But symbols have weight. And in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, weight began to matter again. The crisis didn't just destroy banks, it destroyed assumptions. Overnight, institutions once considered immortal needed emergency bailouts. Central banks printed trillions without hesitation. Balance sheets exploded. Laws were rewritten in days. The rules bent, then snapped, then bent again. For ordinary people, it felt chaotic. For central bankers, it was controlled chaos, necessary chaos. For Germany, it triggered an old reflex. Because while markets were melting down, one thing became very clear inside the Bundesbank. The gold hadn't moved in decades. It hadn't been audited in any meaningful public way. It hadn't been repatriated, touched, or physically verified at scale since the Cold War. The system functioned because no one asked hard questions. And then someone did. In Germany, a small group of economists, journalists, and citizen movements began asking a question that sounded almost primitive in a modern financial system. Does the gold actually exist? And can we get it if we need it? At first, the question was dismissed as paranoia, conspiracy thinking. After all, this was New York, the Federal Reserve, the bedrock of global finance. Suggesting otherwise felt almost rude. But the questions didn't stop. Requests were made for inspections, for detailed inventories, for serial numbers, for proof not on paper, but in metal. What came back was careful, diplomatic, slow. Access was granted, but limited. Visual confirmations, not comprehensive audits. Reassurances, not receipts. And that's when the tone shifted. In 2013, the Bundesbank made a public announcement that stunned financial insiders. Germany would repatriate a significant portion of its gold reserves from New York and Paris back to Frankfurt. Not all of it, just enough to change the conversation. Officially, the explanation was bland. Diversification, logistics, confidence. Nothing political, nothing alarming, but actions speak louder than press releases. Because if this was just symbolism, there was no urgency, no timeline, no pressure. Yet suddenly, schedules were set, targets announced, bars would come home, the sleeping metal would move, and then the delays started. At first, only a tiny fraction arrived, tons promised, but only a handful delivered. Questions followed. Why so slow? Why the multi-year timetable? Why the secrecy around transportation? Why the silence about exact bar identities? Rumors spread through financial circles, not among amateurs, but among professionals who understood how gold custody works. Stories of remelting, of bars that didn't meet original specifications, of gold that had been leased, swapped, or rehypothecated quietly over decades. Nothing was confirmed, nothing was denied, and that silence was the loudest sound of all. Because gold is not like bonds. It's not like currency. You can't duplicate it with accounting entries. A bar is either there or it isn't. And when a nation asks for its gold back, the correct answer is not explanation, it's delivery. What Germany exposed wasn't necessarily theft. It was something more uncomfortable: opacity. A system built on trust that had never been stress-tested between nations. A vault that worked perfectly as long as no one knocked on the door. As shipments continued, the Bundesbank quietly changed its tone. Gold arriving in Frankfurt was reassayed, melted, recast. Not because it was fake, but because its history was now uncertain. Once gold leaves your sight for half a century, you no longer take chances. And this is where the story stops being about Germany, because other central banks were watching. The Netherlands quietly followed. Austria adjusted its strategy. Eastern European nations began increasing gold purchases. Even countries that had mocked gold as a barbarous relic suddenly started buying again. Not trading, buying. Physical accumulation. At the same time, central banks began speaking a new language: sovereignty, resilience, neutral assets. Words that mean one thing beneath the surface: trust is no longer absolute. Gold repatriation wasn't about profit. It was about control. In a world where sanctions can freeze reserves overnight, where payment systems can be weaponized, where access matters more than ownership, physical gold inside your borders becomes insurance. Not against inflation alone, but against exclusion. Germany didn't accuse anyone. It didn't need to. By simply asking for its gold back, it revealed something fragile at the heart of modern finance. The system works because we agree not to test it too hard. And the moment you do, everything slows down. What began as a logistical adjustment became a psychological shock. A reminder that beneath the derivatives, the swaps, the balance sheets, and the promises, there is still metal, heavy, finite, silent. And once nations start thinking that way, the rules change. Because trust, once questioned, never returns to its original form. The moment the illusion finally cracked didn't arrive with a press conference or a leaked memo. It arrived in silence. Crates, timetables, escorts, insurance riders written in language so cautious it bordered on paranoid. When Germany began moving its gold home, the world's monetary system felt something it hadn't felt in decades: fear without a headline. Because gold doesn't move unless trust has already died. Behind closed doors, officials stopped using diplomatic language and started using logistics. How many bars? Which serial numbers? Which purity? Which vaults? Which dates? Questions that shouldn't need to be asked between allies who supposedly share the same financial faith. And yet, they were asked. Repeatedly, quietly, with lawyers in the room. That's when the rumors hardened into something more disturbing. Bars that needed to be melted and recast before shipment. Serial numbers that no longer matched records from the 1950s. Delivery schedules stretched not over weeks, but over years. Not because of airlift constraints, but because of market stability. a phrase that, in central banking, often means we cannot afford the truth to surface all